Hello, everyone. On behalf of the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences, I welcome you all to this next session on decarbonizing electricity markets. In the following 90 minutes, we're going to hear more on price stability, investment incentives, and flexibility concerning supply and demand on the electricity markets. First, Karsten Neuhoff will talk about electricity market design. I will introduce him in a minute, and then he will be joined by representatives of politics, industry, and applied research to discuss the current situation and necessary changes. You're all invited to ask questions. There will be a microphone going around. Please wait for it to get to you, since the whole session will be recorded and we want to have your questions as well. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Marlene Nowotny. I work for Austrian Public Radio in the field of research, communication, ecology, and all things academia. So let's get started. I now have the pleasure to introduce Karsten Neuhoff to you. He is a professor at the Institute of Economics and Business Law at the Technical University Berlin and head of the Climate Policy Department at DIW Berlin, the German Institute of Economic Research. One of his central research questions is how power markets and associated policies should be designed to manage the transformation towards climate neutrality, being socially and economically successful. Karsten Neuhoff is an independent policy advisor for the German government as well as the EU Commission, something we are probably going to hear about more in the discussion. Now we will talk about electricity market design and changing paradigms. Karsten Neuhoff, please proceed.
Passt schon. Ich suche nur die Maus, die ist verschwunden. Die Maus funktioniert nicht, weißt du? Danke.
Wo geht's hin?
Wir haben ihn, ja.
So geht's los, oder?
Nee, aber jetzt weiß ich, wo der Cursor ist. Jetzt müssen wir es hinkriegen. Ja, wunderbar. Well, sorry for the... Machen Sie einfach Vollbild für beides. Das ist die falsche Präsentation. Good morning, everyone. I've got the honor to present on these questions of changing paradigms. How have energy policy objectives changed, and what does this mean for market design? Let's start with our typical energy trilemma that has been one of the things guiding energy policy design, to think of how can we ensure affordability of electricity and energy supply, how can we do so by ensuring the supply of energy is clean, and secure energy availability at all times. You can see they might be competing interests in terms of cost versus environment, which was for a long time driving the debate. Now we came into the gas price crisis, translating into the electricity price crisis in 2020, and suddenly realized it's not only about making sure next year we have the lowest prices, but actually ensuring reliable affordability also in crisis periods. We are in the lucky situation of having relatively cheap wind and solar power available now in our systems, and therefore the challenge increasingly is not wind and solar, but how to complement it with flexibility to translate the wind and the solar energy into the periods when there's not as much sun shining and wind blowing. So it's a clean energy system as the new objective. And we realized in the crisis that yes, we had sufficient generation capacity in the system, but it was not resilient to reductions of the gas supply to the system. So thinking more broadly about resilience of the energy system rather than security of the electricity grid and generation assets behind it. And to add, we now talk about a transition, and for the transition we need investments, and we need manufacturing investments to make PV, wind and other technologies available. So it's a lot about reliability of these transitions and the reliable speed of the investments happening there to give all actors confidence to take forward these investments at affordable prices. So our energy trilemma turned into a quartet. And actually the interesting part is, as I show at the end, they are no longer competing as much as there are synergies between these different objectives that we can achieve. So let's start with reliable affordability. For me, it's always one of the promising pictures and part of the success of the last 2 decades. If you look at cost reductions for wind, offshore, onshore, and solar that we've seen according to IRENA data and the projections from the IEA. So overall, we managed to produce wind and solar now at cost, if you have good circumstances, in terms of financing, in Germany of around 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour. We've produced now 45% of the electricity with wind and solar in Germany, for example, and Austria has a similar situation. Nevertheless, as we came into the crisis, we saw the wholesale prices escalating from price levels of 40, 50 euro prior to the crisis to average annual wholesale prices of 250 in the year 2022. And these wholesale spot prices were rather quickly translated to retail costs for consumers and industry with slightly different time lags across Europe. So we have the challenge that we have low-cost energy supply, but we have to ensure that this low cost reaches consumers to make it an affordable and stable way going forward. And the instrument that one can think of, and that is now priority objective in Europe, is long-term contracting. For a long time in power markets, there was a reluctance to engage in long-term contracts because there was concerns if they are with incumbent utilities and actors, they foreclose the market. We went far too far in abandoning them. And now we realize we need long-term contracts, because if you have a long-term contract between production and the final consumer or contract chain, then you can hedge these price risks, and you may have variations in the spot price, but the average cost of electricity for consumers is stable. So long-term contracts are the core instrument, and finding ways of making sure they are in place is one of the key objectives for energy policy. Now, obviously, as economists, we hope for private contracts to do the trick, often being skeptical about government capabilities of structuring things around contracts. However, if you now look at this scale of contracting that is required, that's a challenge. We've depicted here for a set of companies what is the volume of energy they need per year in terawatt hours. And yellow is the electricity, and dark other energy that with electrification will also be electric in the future. And then next to it, you see our estimate what volumes of contracts they can sign. What limits their capacity to sign contracts is their balance sheet. Because if you sign a 20 or 25-year contract for an input factor, but you have not sold your product, and no one sells a product 25 years ahead of time, then effectively the rating agencies, the bank will tell you, well, you buy something over the 20 years, but you don't know what the value will be. So we consider this as a loan with some discounting to it. And this loan will be on your books like anything else, and it increases your leverage, and therefore we assumed here that you take quite a lot of long-term contracting at the scale of value of half of the equity base of a company. So, and that would be characterized by this brown, but it only captures about 10 to 15% of the energy that needs to be delivered by renewables. So private long-term contracts cannot do the trick. And I think that is a fundamental insight which often is ignored, where people say, yeah, but last year we signed a bit more than the year before. But as economists, we also look at fundamental questions behind it, and we need to consider this in policy design. Second part about long-term contracts If they are private, there are counterparty risks involved. So if I'm a renewable project or a bank funding a renewable project with a private counterparty, on average, I charge higher financing costs, which increase the cost per megawatt hour of electricity by 10% of electricity delivered. But we have a second effect, an indirect effect, which is even bigger. If the consumer, the buyer, the industry, or the utility signs these long-term contracts, as I said, it's on their books. They have a higher leverage factor, and you know the higher leverage factor of the bank, the lower the rating of the actor, and the higher the cost of financing for this actor altogether. So the more contracts they sign, the more expensive overall financing costs are, and you can translate this back, attribute it to the renewable contracts, it would increase delivered energy cost implicitly by another 20%. In 2018-19, various studies came to similar order of magnitude, so 30% more costs for renewables if we do this with private contracting. And then there was a big debate, public guarantees. You can publicly guarantee for the project that they can succeed, so you can address the 10% cost increase, but you can't address the 20% cost increase with this. But you create huge gaming opportunities if public guarantees 20-year contracts between private entities, which are very complex. So it's an option contract you guarantee. I strongly advise against such kind of an approach. Hence, primarily to address these two concerns about long-term contracts, we need to find other ways of moving forward with long-term contracts. The Energy Directive in Europe now says all publicly supported renewables need to be funded with contracts for differences, and the benefits need to be passed to consumers. One way of achieving this is a renewable pool. Effectively, you would tender for new projects, and the new projects compete in terms of who can offer electricity at the lowest price. They get a long-term, perhaps contracts for difference or other long-term contract. All of these contracts are then pooled, added together, and shares of this pool are then offered to final consumers, such that in their portfolio for hedging price risks, they have elements of all these long-term contracts. So if the spot price is 80, the wind project had a long-term contract for 50 euros, the wind project sells for 80 in the spot market, gives 30% back into the pool. The final consumer pays 80 for the electricity in the spot market and gets 30% out of 30 euro out of the pool back as his share. So he effectively gets renewable electricity at the price of the contracts in the pool of 50 to 60 euro across the portfolio. This renewable pool would have two essential design features. One is it needs to be publicly guaranteed, because otherwise market participants are really worried. If I sign a long-term contract with this pool as a consumer, governments will turn around in 2 years and say, yes, we got the first advantage, first actors to kind of sign up. We want to accelerate renewable deployment. Now we support renewables, and new actors are benefiting from this approach. So we need to guarantee that if you participate as a consumer in the pool, you will not be worse off than others. You can guarantee this by granting an exit option. If you want, with a 5-year notice period, you can exit this pool. This also helps the final consumers because you no longer have a 20, 25-year contract, but a 5-year contract, so your rating agencies look far differently at it. And it's a contract that all your competitors have of the same size and characteristics, which again, rating agencies like quite a bit. And having this public guarantee in place, we can guarantee that we run these tenders for year by year for the coming years. We guarantee the demand across Europe, therefore, for renewable technologies, which will hopefully unlock or certainly contribute to unlocking investment into the supply chain, which we are lacking right now for new wind projects and technologies along the supply chain. Second element, in these tenders, if it's one pool, we can make resource differentiation. For example, in Germany, in northern Germany, the wind speed is 2 to 3 times from southern Germany. If we pay all of them the same price, in northern Germany, they make tons of benefits, either as a project or as a landowner, at a time where we at the same time struggle to kind of explain why electricity costs are so high. So we would like to have a differentiation by resource, which is possible in such a joint tender without having cream skimming that only the low wind speed sites go into the auction. We can also ensure in this tender good incentives such that wind system-friendly technologies, so turbines with big blades relative to the generator, are implemented. They are increasingly important the more we go into the renewable system, so we have to make sure the system has the right incentives in place. If we have such a pool, we can go back to our earlier picture. If we had it in place and a consumer would have been signing up for the pool at the scale of electricity she is consuming, then the right top picture shows she would have had this more stable electricity cost, but still an increase. Why? As a consumer, I'm hedged with a renewables profile, so if my demand would be flat across time, I sometimes need electricity if there's not so much wind and solar, and precisely in these hours, electricity tends to be more expensive. And vice versa, if the pool produces more than what I need, it's the other way around. So I get profiling costs on top of this if I'm inflexible. If, and that's the third picture, demand consumers would hedge with some flexibility technology. For example, invest in a battery with 4-hour storage or sign a contract with a battery with 4-hour storage, then they could have stabilized the electricity cost throughout this crisis period. So the renewable pool is designed to encourage investments in flexibility because only jointly renewable contracts and flexibility stabilize electricity costs, precisely what we are looking for to unlock investments into European manufacturing and to assure consumers that the energy prices has been addressed and will not be repeated. Now, if you go to clean energy systems, just repeating these points, we want to kind of find flexibility to shift electricity from periods when there's a lot of wind and solar into periods when there's little and demand is still around. And that's not only batteries, but it's time-flexible charging of cars, it's heat storage, such that buildings or industry that uses heat pumps to deliver electricity can use the heat storage and heat it up at times of low electricity costs. Or it's even storing of intermediate products like clinker in production processes where these storages tend to be very cheap. One illustration, that's the biggest battery park being developed right now in Germany. For 600 megawatt hour of electricity, 6 hectares of size will be covered by this plant. A 250 million euro investment. And this is a 10-year-old, the size of a 10-year-old heat storage in Mannheim, where they use an old gas storage tank, that the ones we know in the cities, fill it up with water, insulate it well. At an investment cost of 27 million euro, they have 3 times almost the energy stored in this capacity. And now it's heat energy rather than electricity. If you look at the transmission factors from heat to electricity, it's about the same energy you can store in both of these sides in terms of electric energy. So if we need heat at certain periods, it's a lot cheaper to invest in heat storage than to invest in battery storage. It needs a lot less resources and less space even in the circumstances. So this shows we have to get a system that the demand side invests in flexibility, because these are far cheaper potentials than only investing in battery storage. And we need to operate this flexibility. Why? Because our electricity system is rapidly changing. In Germany, we used to have a system of roughly 100 gigawatt peak demand and production therefore as well. Now we are connecting wind and solar plants. We'll have 400 to 500 gigawatt production capacity connected. We are connecting electric cars, heat pumps, so we increase also demand from 100 to 500 gigawatt peak. Obviously, neither of this runs all the time, but if they run at different times, then it's a problem. So we have to align the production and the demand through flexibility. But we have to do so not only across Germany, but locally, because our electricity grid, even with big grid extension plans, will not grow very much. So it's essential that flexibility responds locally to the need of production. And that's a big problem of our power market right now, because we've designed it to have big pricing zones. All of Germany is one pricing zone. So if there's a lot of wind, for example, in northern Germany, power prices all of Germany are low, and the demand across Germany makes use of this electricity. And then 1 hour before real time, the system operator looks at the problem and says, oops, our lines up there will overheat if we transmit so much electricity. They tell the wind generators shut down and ask combined cycle gas turbines in southern Germany to start up. We spend 4 billion euro per year for these redispatch measures right now. Alternative, if you use a market system rather than regulation, you kind of have local prices. So if there's a lot of supply in the north of Germany, then the price in this region or this load declines. Demand response flexibility at this location, and you don't have to do any redispatch afterwards. You save 4 million spent for redispatch, and instead you get congestion revenue at a similar order of magnitude. So consumers benefit twice from implementing such a system. Generation doesn't like it so much because they make money out of the system. So that's the political economy of changing market design. So if we want to use flexibility effectively to address our system needs, then we need local price signals. And this illustration kind of shows the system. If you want to dig into electricity economics, right now we have a system where you trade on a national platform, day ahead in auctions, intraday then bilaterally in continuous trading approaches. And then you tell the system operator, this is the schedule how I want to produce or serve electricity into the system. And then the system operator gets back to individual actors and tells them, please change what you wanted to do based on the market signal, because the market price is crap, because it doesn't reflect the value of electricity at a location. So we have to compensate with redispatch for this approach. Instead, we use an economic market approach. If you have an auction platform where in the clearing mechanism for the auction platform, you consider additional constraints, then you get an efficient outcome in the market with different price signals in different parts of the country. The benefit of moving to an approach with nodal pricing of this type is that you maximize liquidity because everyone is participating and all actors compete with each other across the region of nodal pricing, which ultimately can be all of Europe. It's simple market access because the auction platform can have clearing at the marginal price. So if you're a small actor, you bid your marginal cost and you get the clearing price. Our current system is set up in a way such that big actors are benefiting because all intraday trading is bilateral trading, pay as bid. And so the bigger you are, the more information you have, the better you can kind of tailor your bids to the system, and small actors don't get the same price because they don't have that information, but they have to have a 24/7 trading desk if they want to participate. You can have standing orders in local pricing systems, so it's a very simple system, so you can engage far more decentralized actors, precisely what we want to do if we go into demand-side flexibility. We've got now 3 approaches that are under debate in terms of how to move to local pricing. We have the European process of the bidding zone review, which should have concluded 2 years ago, is an eternal thing to say, can we split our pricing zones slightly different? It's highly political, and it has some competing objectives. On the one hand, you want to keep the bidding zones very big to retain some liquidity in this intraday market approach. On the other hand, if they are too big, you don't address the redispatch concerns very much. And then that's why we have a continued delay on this approach, which doesn't really help and will imply we get out, if we do it, a solution that will then have to be revisited a few years later again. So we don't get stability for investments in the system. Then we have an approach of gradually shifting to nodal pricing, which is something we've worked on with the Future Power Markets platform for a decade or so, trying to think what are the individual steps of such a reform that would allow us to implement a system that is well established across the rest of the world and works very well, like in North America. And what would be necessary is first to move from this portfolio-based bidding, which allows big players to hide what they have behind their portfolio, towards unit-based bidding, such that on the auction you bid individual assets with the marginal costs and the startup costs that you have in the ramping rates. Then, based on individual bidding, you can move intraday to auction-based approaches. Again, quite good for liquidity in the market and efficiency, but traders don't like it because right now intraday is first transmission capacity is allocated first come, first serve. So if you're quicker, you get scarce resources for free if you're a trader, and you look at the reporting of big companies, how much their trading benefits have increased over recent years. And then, based on these 2 first steps, you can then implement a joint clearing of energy, transmission, and auxiliary services to move to something like nodal pricing, like in North America. Challenge is here, we want to be quick, and all of these are individual reform elements that need to be agreed then at a European scale. And that is relatively difficult, as we've seen so far. Hence, a third approach is to gradually shift region by region. Europe's market design have all been working with regions that first implemented an option, and then if it worked, others followed this path. And here we can learn from North America. They implemented nodal pricing region by region, and then defined good, effective interfaces between them. So we can think of also a European approach that allows individual countries or pairs of countries to implement nodal pricing. And then the others can look at it and say, that works, let's try and apply this across Europe. So that's the third option in terms of how we can move forward. And I hope we can extend the debate from this first approach, which is on the top of the agenda of many debates, to also be broader, to look for what solution really works for Europe. What is going to be important for this transition is we have to address price risks during the transition. Market participants are worried, and that killed the implementation of nodal pricing in Britain, that they might be slightly worse off after the implementation because of price changes. All the modeling shows that will be a marginal effect. Overall, we save on efficiency, but some locations might be worse off or better off. Depending on the models, is one region or the other region, so it's difficult to predict. But uncertainty kills changes. So one option would be to think about silos. If you have a renewable pool, all the vulnerable consumers will be hedged through the renewable pool. And we can then make sure the renewable pool hedges your price at your location, so you then manage the transition by thinking across solution options. And the second change I would propose is based on a workshop we coordinated with various European participants earlier in June, that we have to think about this reform as something from the perspective of consumers, rather than a reform that addresses needs of TSOs, transmission system operators. It's a big reform, it's a political reform, so consumers need to be part of the game. And consumers will benefit, because we can implement local marketplaces, platforms where in Vienna, you know that's the electricity price in Vienna. And if I optimize my home system or my factory, I respond locally to this price signal. It allows participants to really think of the electricity system as the objective, rather than as autarky as the objective. Autarky as an objective undermines flexibility in the whole system and increases costs a lot. So we need to get people back to the power system, to the society, and the local marketplaces can be implemented through nodal pricing as one option there forward. And finally, if we shift to nodal pricing, that enhances competition and improving efficiency and benefiting consumers. By efficiency gains from everything and by shifting markups from big generation to consumers. Possibly one of the reasons why big generators are not so fond of this change. I did my PhD more than 2 decades ago on market power in networks. And at that time, market power was a big concern in power markets. The reason it was no longer afterwards is forward contracting, because most electricity is forward contracted 1 or 2 years ahead of time in many markets. And Alas and Villa tells us, if you have forward contracted electricity, you're less exposed to the spot price, you have less motivation to manipulate the spot price, because the sales volume is smaller in there. That solved the problem. Until now. Because what we have now is that we have wind and solar power. And we don't know how much wind and solar there will be in 2 days or in 5 days. So we cannot sign forward contracts at the scale of the past. Instead, we see an increasing volume of trading. 25% of electricity in Germany now is traded within the last 24 hours to respond to uncertainties about wind and solar forecasts. This means if you have the average production of fossil and the average of wind, you would think, okay, that's what you contract forward. If now at some instance there is a lot of wind, then the fossil production is declining and the spot price is low. If there's a lot of wind, very little wind, then fossil production increases and power prices are high. That's an outcome in a competitive setting, makes fully sense. And therefore the average price is higher than the price you get, the volume-weighted price, for example, renewables would get out of the system. If we now have forward contracting and market power, then the contracted price in the middle, volume of fossil assets, is going to be at a level where any small changes, you have no incentive to manipulate the price, and the marginal changes are at the marginal cost. But the more you turn to the right, the more additional electricity generation sells in the spot market, the stronger the incentive to put a markup on them to benefit from higher prices, and vice versa on the left side. If we play our same game again then, wind comes in the system, unpredictable, a few days ahead of time. If there's a lot of wind, then suddenly the spot prices, if there's a little wind, suddenly the spot prices are really high because fossils have to increase the production. There's lots of wind, it's the opposite picture. And as you can see, the average price you get with renewables declines dramatically if, in this model, if it's correct, conventional generation can exercise market power. We are spending 19 billion euros to support old renewables in Germany right now. Much of the increase happened because the average value of renewables has declined. This could explain part of the game. The issue is we don't know what happens because all market participants bid in a portfolio where you cannot test whether they exercise market power in Europe. If we were to move to unit-based bidding, in the US, you can monitor what's your bid, what's your marginal cost, and you can identify exercise of market power and monitor it and correct for it. That's why the current shift to a nodal pricing with unit-based bidding would enhance market competition and reduce market power. Final point, resilience of the energy system. As for the next decade, we organized together with NREL and a few US participants and UCL in London as well, a workshop in US with a lot of the TSOs across the globe. And the big concern by everyone was transition uncertainty. For the next decade, we don't know how quickly renewables will be deployed. We don't know very well how quickly electrification will happen. And we don't know how quickly efficiency and flexibility will increase in the system. So demand-supply alignment is more uncertain for the next decade than it was historically and will be after this transition of the system. Now this creates a challenge for companies, because if there's more uncertainty, then you get to extreme situations. Would you, as a market participant, invest in capacity that you need only every 5 to 10 years in this big uncertainty spectrum? No. After the experience of the electricity crisis, not. Because if there is an extreme situation, then governments will come in. So some of your competitors that might not make this securing investments will anyway be saved. So why would you make this commitment up front? For this reason, we have a big debate now on capacity mechanisms. Should governments jump in and secure through regulation that we have sufficient capacity in the system to match demand and supply in this uncertain environment going forward? And the idea behind it is that you find some additional revenue stream for capacity or flexibility such that you get more of this in the system. Sufficient. This in turn implies that there will be more production capacity available, there will be less scarcity, so the wholesale price will be lower across this period and flatter. But if the wholesale price is flat, then there's little value to invest in flexibility, because as a flexibility investor, you benefit from the spread of high prices and low prices. So capacity mechanisms, central auctions, all these kind of approaches, they reduce the benefits for flexibility in the energy markets and reduce the incentive to invest in flexibility. Now you could argue, so let's make sure we also include the flexibility elements into the tenders for capacity payments. The track record of doing so is relatively bad if you look across the globe. One reason is these tenders are set up by regulators to be sure we have sufficient capacity if it works. Flexibility, we don't know how well it works in the future, so we highly discount them, so they get far less money for what they can contribute to the system. The timelines might not match their needs, and a lot of the flexibility is behind the meter. It's at the side of the consumer, so how should it participate in such centralized mechanisms altogether? So it will be challenging to implement conventional capacity mechanisms to make sure their requirements also match the needs for flexibility, and to make sure that the costs of these mechanisms are allocated to the hours when they serve the system, such that demand-side actors that invest in their own flexibility don't have to pay for centralized capacity mechanism, but only the actors that don't invest in their own flexibility. Now, managing this transition will be tricky, because a lot of industrial players will say, yeah, but we first need to invest in flexibility so we can respond to the system altogether. For this reason, I think we need to learn from the electricity crisis and learn from one instrument that actually worked surprising to save our ass. We had in Germany set up a strategic reserve, put a lot of power stations into a reserve to make sure we can phase out nuclear power stations and still be safe in 2022. Turned out that we needed it because the French nuclear fleet was down for other reasons at that period, and we got a really scarce situation across Europe on the power market side. So we allowed all the generation that was in the strategic reserve to come in the market. They reduced the price level across Europe, and they really saved the electricity system across Europe, the strategic reserve that was set up at that period. The only tricky part, we broke a promise. It was promised that these assets would only get in the market if demand doesn't meet supply, which in the current design implies 5,000 or 10,000 euro per megawatt hour spot prices. Imagine we would have allowed these prices to go to that level in the gas crisis. I think any government would have fallen within days. So government said, yes, we need them in the market, but they can operate at market prices. And we broke the promise that these assets would not come back to the market. So we need to have a new credible promise for a strategic reserve, which we would now call a reliability reserve. We invest in or take old assets, put them in a reserve, and assets in this reserve can operate whenever power prices reach 500 euros per megawatt hour. 500 euros per megawatt hour is low enough that you can maintain this for a few days without getting in trouble with consumers, whether private or industrial households. 500 euros is a great price because it limits the counterparty risks in forward contracting and therefore supports more forward contracting. In the crisis, governments had to underwrite forward contracts with I think almost 100 billion euro. I have to figure the number out again, because the counterparty risk was so big and participants couldn't kind of bear it anymore. And 100 euros at the same time is high enough such that flexibility options will continue to benefit and can come into the market. So with a reliability reserve, we can secure the functioning of the energy market and forward contracting market by addressing the concerns that there might be big transition uncertainty. And do so in a way that gives TSOs the confidence, yes, we can manage supply and demand balance, but gives flexibility the option to come in the market, and we all see how it works, and we can scale up flexibility. It's a learning environment for flexibility. We are doing some simulations, just a sneak preview here, where you can see the price duration curve. So if you model such a reliability reserve, a capacity mechanism, or an energy-only market, across the 8,760 hours per year, you get different price levels throughout this year. And you see the variations, the big variations at the right-hand side, which come because we model different years and the price levels differ according to how much wind and solar is in these years. What's interesting now for us is what happens in this very few hours where you have high prices. So let's zoom into this 100 hours of potentially high prices. If you have an energy-only market, prices need to go up to whatever price level, let's say 5,000 euros, such that it is worthwhile to get remunerated for a fixed cost of investing in capacity that is very rarely operated, in this case for 20, 25 hours per year on average, or less than that. Now, if you go to the reliability reserve, you have assets in the backhand which come into the market at 500 euro. So the price never exceeds this level. The 500 euro implies that you get still high prices and you get investments in there. But for up to 100 hours, on average 20 to 50 hours, the reliability reserve is setting the price at 500 euros. And you can think about a capacity market. If you have a lot of capacity in the system, you never get into the scarcity pricing domain, and you have price levels that never exceed this 100-something euro per megawatt hour, whatever the marginal price is with a gas turbine operating in the system. So we get three different paradigms that we can follow, and if you model it, on average, the cost to consumers are not very different. The energy-only market, the question is it credible that these price levels will be reached? Can it unlock the investments? That's the big debate right now. In the question of the reliability reserve, it unlocks flexibility, and we see it unlocks twice as much flexibility as if we have the centralized capacity market, because it can't, if the flexibility cannot participate there. You have slightly lower average wholesale market prices in the capacity market, but you then have to add the costs for the capacity payments, which also are passed on to consumers. So the central capacity market and reliability reserve roughly have a similar price level in the early 2030s, with a big difference that with the reliability reserve, you move into the development of getting efficient flexibility into the system, so the dynamic benefits for the overall system are far bigger, because we really move to a system combining renewables with flexibility to reduce overall cost to the system, to reduce emissions to the system, to reduce import dependency of fossil fuels that otherwise would be required to run centralized capacities under a capacity mechanism. So let me summarize. Our sense is that we are moving from this energy trilemma to energy quartet, where the objectives are emerging and adapting slightly from where they were before. And if you want to make affordability reliable, we need long-term contracts, and a renewable energy pool ensures that these contracts are passed from producers to the final consumer, addressing various market fails that are otherwise in place. Local market prices, nodal pricing, is essential if you want to make sure that flexibility is used to manage demand and supply across the system, such that we can actually run the system as a clean energy system. To ensure resilience in the system, is a big debate right now, how can we make sure there's sufficient capacity, but also how can we make sure that the energy for running this capacity is going to be there. A reliability reserve could offer an attractive option, and we would like more attention put on this one, which was early on in the debate of a capacity mechanism in 2015 and should be back on the debate now. And for reliable speed, my time is running out, so I would argue that renewable energy targets are one way of securing this reliable speed. And there's a lot of interactions across these elements. If we want reliable affordability, we need reliable speed to reduce costs by having stable investment environments. And that targets then gives guidance, for example, for the auction volumes in the tenders for the renewable pool. If we want to have reliable affordability, we need to make sure the system runs as cheap as possible with as limited transmission investment as needed and no redispatch costs. So it motivates effectively a shifting to a clean energy system with local prices. And the renewable energy pool provides a hedge during this transition to address price risk for market participants also of this transition. If you want to unlock more flexibility to make the energy system clean, then the resilient energy system can use a reliability reserve that provides security and helps to unlock more flexibility, and in turn provides a more useful price signal to operate the system then for making flexibility operational. And the resilient energy system with a reliability reserve provides a learning environment for flexibility, therefore allows us to deploy flexibility and renewables at a reliable speed, and the coordination between both of them at the side of TSOs, at network expansion, and various other players, I think helps in here, and you can think of various further interactions. So altogether, let me summarize. We have a change of policy objectives following the big deployment of renewables and flexibility, following the electricity crisis, and we now need to think how this is reflected in market design and implement this rapidly. I'm looking forward to the discussion about this.
Thank you very much, Karsten Neuhoff. I'm afraid to touch something again, like before, where I took the visuals away from you. Can I just move it? Yeah. Yeah, I work for the radio. We are not as visual as other people, I think. If you have any questions for Karsten Neuhoff concerning his talk, please hold on to them, memorize them. In a few minutes into the discussion, you will get the chance to ask questions. We will now be joined by the other participants of the panel. I will do this in an alphabetical order. Please welcome Tara Estl. She is head of the competence unit Integrated Energy Systems at the Austrian Institute of Technology, AIT, and vice president of EUREC, the Association of European Renewable Energy Research Centers. Flexibility, we heard a lot about that during the talk, is one of her core topics, often explored within research projects collaborating with the industry. Karl Gruber is the industry representative in this panel. Please welcome Karl Gruber. He is the managing director of Wien Energie GmbH, where he is responsible for asset development, realization and management, asset decarbonization and new technologies, to name a few of his areas of operations. And last but not least, but that's the alphabet, please welcome Jürgen Schneider with me. Jürgen Schneider is head of the Directorate General 6, Climate Action and Energy at the Federal Ministry for Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation and Technology in Austria. He has a lot of experience as a researcher and policy advisor concerning the transformation towards climate neutrality, for instance, working on climate change and energy at the Environment Agency Austria for more than a decade. Flexibility, that is a term we heard a lot in the last 40 minutes, and I think we have to come back to it again, but I want to start with European policies. In April, the European Union decided to reform the EU power market to protect industry and consumers against price volatility. Overall, the reform aims for lower costs, for more green energy and stable pricing. Jürgen Schneider, what is the current situation in Austria within this reform process?
Well, yes. I mean, we have a long history of a liberal electricity market in Europe. Nevertheless, when we came into the energy crisis in 2022, following the Russian war of aggression against the Ukraine, we had unprecedented, first of all, concerns about security of supply, mainly driven by the uncertainties on gas supply, since we had a very high exposure on Russian gas, which we managed to reduce considerably in Europe, not in Austria, as you might be aware. And due to the electricity market design, the high gas prices very soon translated into high electricity prices. And as you all know, not every household uses gas. Most of industry uses gas, but every household uses electricity. And it was basically this fossil price shock which also brought us into a round of high inflation, cost increases, with all the political debates we had over the last 2 years or so. So there's a lot of discussion on the market design in Europe and a lot of discussion about quick fixes. I mean, we had during the 6 months or in the second half of 2022, we met very frequently in Brussels, the energy ministers. We had 11 extraordinary energy councils. We adopted 5 emergency regulations. And there was also intense discussions how a reform of the electricity market could look like. And so we ended up with not a fundamental reform, but with additional points, starting with enhancing consumer rights. So everyone now has the right to get a flexible contract, a floater. We also increased the rights for changing suppliers and things like that. We also obliged the utilities to hedge in the market itself, in particular for renewables. We've heard that in the presentation. It's now foreseen that new installations, if we want to apply a de-risking instrument, it should be a contracts for difference. Nevertheless, in many European countries, we have existing schemes which have their approval under the state aid rules. For instance, in Austria, you might know we have an Renewable Deployment Act. We have basically for large installations a market premium, and we have approval from DG Competition on that scheme until 2030. So we'll see how fast the CFD will kick in. Nevertheless, also the market premium we have in Austria has some elements of CFDs. So that was some sort of compromise, and the main objective of this was really to stabilize prices, as you have pointed out. I mean, how effective that will be, we'll see. We now have to translate that into national legislation, and I have to confess, we are really lagging behind here in Austria because we still have to transpose much of the last electricity market reform, which we were due to implement until the end of 2020. Nevertheless, we had to learn that the political will, and for every energy law we need a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly. The political will hasn't been as high as we would have wished. We have a proposal ready for that, which also addresses things like flexibility. So that still needs to be implemented. So we have on a European scale a system which is, well, I wouldn't say state of the art, but which took note of some of the experiences in 2022. I also agree with the previous speakers that the really big challenge we are having now is the transitional period we are facing in. Nevertheless, I mean, in terms of renewable deployments, we are in Austria in a quite comfortable situation. And if we look at the 2023 data, we had about 87% of our electricity production already renewable, strongly relying on assets which were built decades ago, so basically hydro. But we have also huge increases in wind, but in particular in solar. Last year we added 2.6 gigawatts. This year in the first half, again 1 gigawatt. But that all brings quite some challenges. And really, the trick will be to bring predictability into the market. To have on one hand side a strong market signal for investors, because we need additional investments. On the other hand, to have more predictability on the price side. I mean, those who are from Austria, you will be well aware we have general elections in 4 weeks. If I look at the programs of the different parties, you will not see very much on transition. You will not see much on climate. You will not see much on environmental concerns, but every party speaks about energy prices. There's a huge discussion about that. And we also had a lot of interventions. We know that economic experts are always a little bit reluctant. Nevertheless, we have an electricity price break in force. We have decreased the electricity levy in Austria. We are paying for our renewable support scheme, which is usually paid for by the consumers. We have taken that over by the federal budget. That's 900 million euro alone. The electricity price break over the whole period is more than 3 billion. Nevertheless, we have to come back as soon as possible to market conditions. So we have centrally agreed rules in Europe. We have now amended them, in particular to secure, on the one hand, a stable investment environment, on the other hand, to do what we can to have more predictability in prices and to shield ourselves against too high prices. Nevertheless, we have a market, no question about that. So I would say very interesting journey, but still a long way to go.
Tara, Estl, Jürgen Schneider just said that we are behind in certain areas of needed reform. What I wanted to ask you is that this EU-wide reform is also focusing on green energy. What is your view on the current state of renewable energy support policies in Austria? What is needed here? Where are we way behind? Where are we maybe on track?
That's a really big question. Yeah, I fully agree that the Renewable Deployment Act has really pushed forward, especially PV, but also the other renewables in Austria a lot. So I think we can see there that it's working. So I think I can really say this is a check. And also regarding the light CFD, I think we could call it, that's implemented there. It's also supporting renewables and its bankability. So I think there's a plus. I think on the CFD side, I think we could still improve a little. We have an ongoing project that's called Marktprämie 2.0, where we are analyzing what we think would be a good fit. We don't have the answer yet, but we'll have it soon. Then we can, then we can tell you. Yeah, and I mean, we have this ELWG. I'm just like using the short Austrian name now. That's like this law that Jürgen Schneider just talked about, that's in discussion for some time now, and I've seen one of the versions, and I really think that especially regarding flexibility, consumer integration, there are really good regulations in there. So I really think that it would be really great to get the politicians to agree on it, but I think it's hard to get this done. I mean, we really thought that it would be implemented this summer, but it's not yet. And yeah, I guess with the election process, I think it will be a while. So I think that we are all, like in Austria, we are all waiting that this is implemented, because we really need it to get forward on grid tariffs, to get forward on flexibility.
Karl Gruber, staying with renewables, what is the industry's perspective on this? What are the policies you are looking for, the support you want? And please make a short wish list.
I will try to do so. So thank you a lot for inviting me to share my views. So the future is renewable, and that's a definite answer. I'm standing by that. But we are in front of a very strong transformation period, and the transformation period in our business means a lot of investment. A energy-only market that has price signals that have a validity of, let's say, 1.5 years, because there is no validity of prices which are longer than that, is not able to kick off investments which might pay off in 15 years. So to give flexibility, or as when I was in university almost 30 years ago, it was called capacity. So I don't care whether it's been called flexibility markets or capacity markets, but I think it's dearly needed to kick off all those investments, and the market design of those need to give security to those investments. Otherwise, you have a lot of risk in those investments. A lot of risk means you have high risk premiums on the investment that is just expensive. And in the end, the customer has to pay for that, and somebody is just cashing that out. So I think we are in front of a large transformation, which is not only a technical transformation, which has become possible due to the low prices for solar and wind generation. But we also need to adapt our regulatory system. So the liberalization of energy markets was implemented 30 years ago in order to get cost effectiveness in a system where it has not been then. But we don't, but I think cost effectiveness is a part of the system that has now been implemented. But in this transformation period, we need now a lot of investment incentives in the system, coming from the system. And for that, we need a new capacity market or flexibility markets, I don't care, as I said, how you call it, design that allows for that, and then it will work out on its own. The paradigms that were valid 30 years ago, meaning having a large fleet of old power plants standing around, or possibly also new power plants, and enough capacity in the network is anymore, because we don't have a copper plate, but we have just thin copper lines. So we need to reflect that. We need to integrate energy regulations, and we have to have a very good design for flexibility or capacity market in order to do the next step. And we are right in front of that.
If there are any questions, please raise your hand. The microphone will get to you. I will try to take off my glasses regularly so I can see you, and then put them on so I can see my questions. Karsten Neuhoff, I think it's great that we ended with your last slide, because this is your proposal for a redesign of the power market. Before we were talking about the reform plans of the European Union. Did they listen to you when they made their reform plans?
I think it was a summary of what are the options out there, so it's not my reform plan. But on the contract for differences, I think there is a lot of momentum in this direction. And my sense is that electricity policy was in the past largely policy design amongst the producers and actors delivering electricity, but didn't focus as much on the needs of consumers, because it was said that at the end they get cheap electricity, and we found in the crisis that it didn't really work out as a consumer would be hoping for. We have sliding market premium in Austria and Germany, which secure investors but don't secure consumers. And that is, I think, a reflection of the interests that are reflected in design processes. That's why it was interesting that at the European level it was possible to implement the requirement that contracts for differences that secure investors and consumers need to be the basis of support mechanisms. And I'm intrigued to observe that at least gradually consumers, industrial consumers, not industry in terms of electricity producers, start to get more engaged in this process. Because we see more and more voices that say, it's so uncertain what will be the price level in the future, that is an investment obstacle for industry, manufacturing industry. And I think that is something that is disconcerting for policymakers. So we need to change this and implement this first part. In terms of local price signals, we've had for a decade a process of saying, yes, we gradually reform our market design paradigm with these pricing zones. And then there was always another little reform element that was added and discussed, and we continuously hear, yeah, let's close this reform, let's make another little step, and then we reconsider and look at the bigger picture. And I think that's a risky approach, because by now there are a lot of actors that are disconcerted. What's the picture in 5 and 10 years? That's what, if I'm making an investment, a locational choice for my manufacturing plant, I want to know. So I think we need to have this discussion now. We can't postpone it any longer. And so far, policymakers haven't really engaged in this discussion. We still talk about whether we have the bidding zone review or not, but not thinking about alternative options. And finally, on the capacity market, I am concerned that we talk about flexibility incentives, but at the end, we make a few adjustments to some of the regulation, which is important. So in Germany, we have a network tariff which discourages flexibility. So we reduce some of the obstacles, but for investments, it's important that they get all the benefits as that flexibility offers. The more of the benefits that are offered that are being paid for, the more investments we will see. That's our economics picture to it. And policymakers argue often, well, we've done 1 or 2 things for flexibility now. We've left 2 or 3 others open. I think that's where we still have a way to go in the debates now.
Tara, Estl, Karsten Neuhoff, before in his talk, spoke about a publicly guaranteed renewable energy pool. What is your opinion on that? Would that be something that would guarantee more flexibility within power markets? Or would you aim for a different strategy?
It was really interesting to see it, and I really think I don't have like an answer to this question, but I really know that we really need flexibility, and we will need like all of it, and we will need short flexibility. I mean, when we really see it when we model the future, when we have the European energy systems models, we see that when we look at 2040, 2050, there is an increasing need for flexibility in the short term, like during the day, but also for to shift between seasons. And so, yeah, I think to have this answer and to answer it straight, I think we still, at least I need still a little bit of research to really know what's the best design to do it. Currently, we look from it a little bit more from the perspective of how, okay, these are the markets, how evolve from the markets. Like, for example, we have a project that's called Industry for Redispatch, that we encourage industry to bring their flexibility into the markets that are there, balancing markets and so on, and especially focusing on redispatch to help the transmission system operator to solve the problems in the grid, say it like that. But it's a little bit of a different approach, but this worked really well. and where I can like fully agree that we will need locational information in future. So even like either from both directions, when you come from locational pricing, but also like from the traditional markets, from both sides, I think we see that we really need a lot of information about the single assets. So we also, like even coming from the normal markets and integrating flexibility into them, we saw that when we want to solve all the grid issues on distribution grid level, but also on transmission system level, like we really need the schedules, we need a lot of information.
Karl Gruber, before you said that renewables, of course, are the future. So what do you need as Wien Energie? What does the industry need to invest in renewables? Or on the other hand, what are the major barriers to maybe not invest as much at the moment? I mean, energy demand is on the rise, so even if we are in a good place now, we will need more.
Yeah, that I would underwrite in a second. We just, or almost just, invest into renewables at Wien Energie. I will not be able to get a supervisory board approval for any natural gas-fired power plant anymore, and I would never try to do so, I have to admit. But what I, for example, would try to get is an advisory board approval for a green hydrogen-fired power plant, because as Taras said, that we need to shift energy from day to night time, but we also need to shift it seasonally, so we need to have the technical appliances to do so. But what do we need? We need to have a framework where we can invest in all those parts of the system that we need, and one part of the system is currently not valued in the system, and that is storage. There's an exemption in Austrian law for one specific part of storage. Jürgen is laughing beside me. It's the so-called pumped storage plant exemption, and that has been that is there for a good reason, because in the olden days that was the flexibility that was necessary for the old hydrothermal coupling of 40 years ago, and we need a lot of storage in the future, much more battery. We need much more hydrogen in order to make the shift of all those fluctuating future generation where the time of generation completely falls apart from the time of consumption of those energies. And if I look into the future, I see that a lot of that generation will be solar, because that's the only energy that can be implemented fast enough to secure the amount of energy we need. So the energy system will become something like agriculture, actually. So we'll have a big harvest in summertime, actually at noontime in summertime, and you need to store it somewhere. And how agriculture is doing that, I always tell everybody, go to Harbor Vienna. There are these big buildings there, no windows there. The architect didn't just miss out for them. It's full of grain, so we can bake bread in winter time, and we need to have the same in our electricity, actually energy system. Because what changes is now that in the olden days, right, a lot of the energy source came over, let's say coal plants, and a big pipeline to Siberia in Austria. And there were all these storages in the system. And the electricity system was just a means of distributing that energy to the final customer. But what happens now with all this electrification is that the electricity system becomes the source. Then you need to store it somehow. You will not be able to store it all in the electricity system, so you need to store it in the gas system in form of let's say green hydrogen, for example, and then get it back into the electricity system when customers need them. Let's say at the 15th of January, when it's dark, when it's cold, when it's dry, but still people want to flick the switch of the light. So the system has changed, regulation needs to change accordingly, in the future, if you forecast that, you will have a system that basically consists of fixed cost. You have a network, which is fixed cost. You have a battery or a hydrogen electrolyzer and a power plant that is generating electricity then, which is basically fixed cost. You have PV plants, which are fixed cost. It's all fixed cost, which actually introduces a lot of stability in the system, but not with an energy-only market that basically handles variable cost. And that is something which we have to overcome. And that is why I think we need those capacity markets. I know all traders don't like that because all those fluctuations will go away, but I think that's good.
So Karl Gruber just said what he needs. Jürgen Schneider, what can you provide? Okay, but let's talk about the next government maybe as well. So what can you provide at the moment, and what should the next government provide?
I mean, one of the most important points, and I already said that we have a lot of uncertainties. I mean, everyone, well, if you look at the whole energy system, electricity amounts for 22, 23% or something like that. We predicted years ago that the share will increase. It basically didn't increase, which could be, which is one of the really those indicators for the uncertainty which we have in the system. Nevertheless, you all know, in order to decarbonize means basically electrification. So we need predictable conditions. We talked about the ELWG, which is the law which we unfortunately couldn't pass through in this legislative period. By the way, it's the rule book for the functioning of the electricity market. I mean, it's a very nice law. If you print it, it's 150 pages, and it needs a lot of delegated acts and things like that. But the electricity market is complex. What will it provide for? It will provide for new roles. We heard the old system, centralized power units and consumers. That will be shaked up completely. We will have prosumers, we will have small production sites. I mean, we already have the renewable energy communities, and that will enhance. We also will need a lot of flexibility from the consumer side, and we will still have to explain that to our population. I mean, we have now rolled all smart meters, we have very high coverage, but nevertheless we have price signals. But if you have a fixed term tariff, you won't behave for that signal. I mean, I can give you the example of today. We have 4 gigawatt solar now. We have prices in, if you look at the price signal from today, from yesterday, the day ahead. Now we have 20, 30 euros. This evening we have 500. We are over your 500. Why is that the case? Because the sun will go down. We had very dry weeks, so almost no hydro. There's no wind. You can look outside. That means that the fossil capacity will come into the market, and they have a marginal pricing, and they have a cost, and we will go up until 500. Who knows that? In a normal market economy, you would put on your dishwasher and everything during noon, and save electricity in the evening. So we need, and if you have a heat pump or a battery electric vehicle, you could really benefit. I mean, you could charge your vehicle when electricity costs nothing, and we have very many hours now with negative prices. So we need that kind of flexibility, and we not only want to have capacity market from the supply side, we really want also strong contribution from the demand side. So we need the ELWG. We have another piece of legislation, which is the Renewable Deployment Acceleration Act. That will in particular increase the permitting procedures, not only for generation, but also for the grid infrastructure. Some of the top problems we talked about can be eased or solved by improving the grid infrastructure. We need huge investments. the transmission system in Austria, 9 billion euro in the next 10 years, the distribution grid, much more than 10 billion in the next years. Nevertheless, we will need that, and I would go as far as saying that's really no regret. So we need a clear framework, a clear commitment. We have now finally also produced a national energy and climate plan. We have laid down what we need to achieve our 2030 climate and energy targets. Now we need all the players in the market, and the number of players has increased dramatically to really make investments, adopt to that, and let the markets work.
Just a gentle reminder, if there are any questions, please raise your hand. You're going to be sorry later because our time is running out. Yeah, there's a question.
So many thanks for the discussion, and I live in Vienna, so the market really affects me, and I have Wien Energie, so I have a question for you. So from the consumer side, I mean, I understand your explanations of investments and all of that, but how are you, from the industry perspective, securing consumers? I don't want to call it welfare, but consumers also cannot continuously track these trends in the market and, I don't know, adjust our day just to benefit from these negative prices and so on. So as industry, do you have some ideas in terms of how we secure consumers over time? I mean, I know that it should come from legislation as well, but it would be nice from an industry perspective to say, as producers or as suppliers of the service, we're doing this for the consumers. And it's often that we don't see this, and so consumers bear a lot of the shock. And my second question is also to the lovely guy from the Climate Energy Ministry. The question that I have for you is, you mentioned that before you're now relying on systems that were there decades ago, and all of a sudden now they are being deployed. My question is, what is the barrier to using it beforehand? Why have we left those systems and then only redeployed them in crisis or when fossil was not available? Is this something that has got to do with the technology, or is it something that has got to do with political will? If it's political will, then to what extent can we secure this kind of because if politics is driving, or the political will is driving how these markets behave, then what can we do within this energy sector, and to what extent can we really look at how the political will is influencing how the legislations is run, but also how the market is resilient over time? Thanks.
Karl Gruber.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for being a client of Wien Energie. And hopefully staying so. And that's not so easy, actually, because when you're living in Vienna, you have the possibility to choose from among 100 different offers, and we are just one or two of them. What is necessary from my perspective? I think affordability is a big part of that, and that is actually the political side of that. Once energy does not become affordable for the broad public, there is no sense in producing anymore, because that throws us back into let's say the Neolithicum, when you don't have the ability to get energy. So I think personally, and I mean no disrespect, but I think the inability of European politics to copy the Iberian model in all of Europe was a big mistake, and governments all over Europe will pay dearly for that, because that has moved a lot of wealth among the society, and you see that that's happening now. What does I mean by that? In Spain and Portugal decided to pay at the border the increased prices for gas, and not run those price shocks into the economy. I was in Spain last year in July. Inflation in Austria at that time was 10.5%. In Spain it was 1.5%. So 2 years, 2.5 years of inflation have bled people. And that is my opinion. So what are we doing? We are investing in our client base during those very hard times when you wanted to get an offer in Vienna as a client. You got one offer that was ours because the 99 others were gone. And I think that is something that needs to be learned from that. So all the other suppliers of energy need to have similar, let's say, rules to even offer their services in those those hard times. And I think for reasons of customer law, offers will become more stable. I understand that flexibility is necessary from the client side, but that applies mostly, I think, for industrial or a little bit smaller company clients, because they have capacities they actually can really change over time. And with our clients, the people around here, we will, I guess, have in future times less flexible tariffs for consumer law, and have binding offers for, let's say, a year, because over this time period we can fix prices on energy markets.
The second question was for Jürgen Schneider, representing the Ministry for Climate Action and Energy, and it addressed the redeployment of existing infrastructures.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say we have a little bit of a different situation compared to Germany. I mean, you talked about your power plant reserve, which were basically old lignite-fired power plants, which could be brought into the market, compensating in particular in the winter of 22 for loss of production from French nuclear. In Austria, we have a little bit of a different system. We have a network reserve, our TSO. Makes a tender for this network reserve, which are mainly gas-fired power plants, which would not be in the market because where is enough supply from other sources. I mean, what we are currently assessing, and which is really not decided yet, is how we are going to deal in the future with flexibility. I mean, we see what's happening in Germany now with discussions about the capacity market and also the tendering of 10 gigawatts of power plant capacity, and in Austria that will be up to a decision by the next government to deal with that.
Karsten Neuhoff, you wanted to add something, and after that we have one more question from the audience.
I think we very much appreciate how Wien Energie and many other utilities, local utilities in some local ownership, helped their consumers in the period and charged a price which didn't match the marginal cost of serving this consumer in the market by pooling across the consumers in your existing asset base. Now, we haven't structurally changed the situation. We have some declarations. We want all suppliers to contract ahead of time for their consumers, and we want to verify this. First of all, I don't see how we really can verify this in a complex contracting environment, so it's a political declaration, but nothing I've seen anywhere implemented. And secondly, you are always in competition with new entrants that can come in the market and can get out of the market in worst case situations. That limits the space of individual actors, even if in public ownership, to contract. And that's the reason why I think we have a big failure of long-term contracts to secure stable electricity prices for you. And that's the motivation to think of a renewable energy pool. We know the total volume of electricity we need in the system because people change suppliers, but they don't leave the country. Industrial companies change it. And so that's why if we have this pool that signs long-term contracts with the producers, limiting costs for production, and then the asset, which is the access to this pooling instrument, is passed not to a supplier, but to the final consumer and managed on behalf of the final consumer. So if you change your supplier, the new supplier would get your access to the pool, And so that means everyone has a long-term hedge for 80% of the cost, which matches the electricity energy volumes, which is important because that's where most of the thinking and most of the risk right now is with utilities. So what they do is they work on this long-term contract. So we have an entire industry of consultants built up to sign long-term private power purchasing agreements where you can run a centralized tender without of information loss but increased competition, pass it on, and then the supplier can really focus on flexibility, contracting own flexibility, working with the consumer, making you an offer how can he operate your heat pump, your and to respond to the local price signal. So that's, I think, where we need to think sometimes out of the box because our little changes often don't really address the issues. And sometimes there are too much declarations. We want to do monitoring of forward contracting, but we can't do it, at least.
There are two small points that I forgot to say and I would like to mention. One is concerning inflation, at least the electricity price break, which we introduced in 2022, we had long discussions with our statistical service how to design it in order to reduce inflation. At least one of the measures we were responsible to implement, we took account on that, but I agree that that might not be true for all the measures which were adopted within the government. And the other thing is also one of the issues we are regulating in the new ELWG is this supply of last resort, which is a very, well, was a theoretical question before 2022, but now it became very, very clear that in the whole bunch of possible suppliers, usually in the crisis you end up with one, which is your local utility, which for political reason, and we really agree that that was very important to make some offers for consumers which were left alone because a lot of suppliers just left the market.
Please, there's one more question in the audience.
I'm a bit lost in this discussion because I have the impression that nobody's really talking about the proposals Karsten made, and everybody's talking very interesting things that might be connected to it, but nobody talks about these four very clear proposals: renewable energy pool, local marketplace and nodding pricing, renewable energy targets, and reliability reserve. Could you, I mean, the Austrian speakers, really clearly give your opinion on this? Is it a good proposal? Is it, where are the flaws from your point of view? Is the whole system flawed or whatsoever? So this I would like to know from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. We're quickly approaching the end of this session, so maybe, yeah, exactly, turn around. You have the model right here. Karl Gruber, maybe you could start and briefly address the proposal of Karsten Neuhoff and what you think of these strategies from an industry perspective.
Yeah, I think to have some fixing of risk for those people who invest into renewables, which is basically the idea of a renewable energy pool, is a good idea. It happened in the past, like Ökostromgesetz basically was such a thing. So you had ÖMAG buying all that electricity from wind and solar, no matter when it came, for a fixed price. So there was all the risk was basically thrown on network clients because they paid for that. I think that has to be added up with a flexibility option within the pool in order to shift the electricity that is being bought from the market for a fixed price to the place in time when it's being needed by the client on the other side. So I think renewable generation and storage capacity needs to become one thing, like in the olden days. A power plant, and that's at least what I learned 30 years ago, and I think it hasn't changed, can only produce two different products. One product is energy, and the other product is the dispatchability of energy, right? And a coal power plant and a gas-fired power plant is very good at producing both things. A solar power plant is not. But if you add a battery, at least in a certain sense it is. And if you add an electrolyzer, it is even more. So we have to think about the way those investments get into this renewable energy pool and how they then sell it off to the client. And as I said before, the thing which we have learned is that the unpredictability of prices is very bad for the people who in the end pay for all of that. But all the elements which we throw into that pool are fixed cost. So in the end, they have a stable price base. We only need to throw things in that are able in the end to deliver the energy at the proper place in time to the client. However, this is mixed up. If you just think that you have one element of the market that does all the trick, that doesn't work, and the spatial distribution of all that also is important. It's not possible anymore, and that was one of the paradigms of the liberalized market, that you produce at the German coast and you deliver in Sicily. That doesn't work. It just works on very small areas anymore. So there is no common Austro-German or German-Austro, better to say that, price zone. It's split up. The German price zone will split up. The Austrian price zone will split up. There might be, in a very extreme situation, a Viennese price zone, or even there's a price zone around Simmering, and then there's a price zone around Döbling, and let's see how the prices will develop there. But that's actually the situation. This is why I think that when you do that, when you further develop our market system, you need to think very hard about what are the technical elements which you throw in. And I don't think that a PV plant without a battery is a good thing to throw in. I don't think that a wind farm without some storage option is a good thing to throw in, because in the end you need always two things. You need energy and you need that dispatchability in order to service the client.
So Karsten Neuhoff is an advisor for the German government. For the EU Commission, Jürgen Schneider. Should the Austrian government also hire Karsten Neuhoff?
I mean, I try to answer your question. I mean, concerning reliable speed, I already touched on that. We're working on that. We will amend the Renewable Deployment Act. Now, for instance, we are supporting PV, just PV alone. For sure, we will amend that in the next legislative period. And I also said we have a National Energy and Climate Plan, and we also work on the Renewable Deployment Acceleration Act. Resilient energy system, on the reliability, reserve and flexibility, I already touched on that in my intervention previously, where I said we are in an analytical phase. When it comes to clean energy system and local markets, I mean, from an economic point of view, you have scarcities, you have price signals, and you want price signals to work. But it's a political issue. I mean, I told you, with every energy law in Austria, I need a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly. And to have splits in price zones and to tell people in Upper Austria you have to pay more for electricity than in Burgenland will be politically a very, very, very tough job. And I don't know where we will end in such a discussion. By the way, we have the same discussion in Germany about the split of a price zone. I mean, we have one of our neighboring provinces in Germany, Bavaria. They were very reluctant to get transmission cables between North Sea and Bavaria. And we should pay the price for it, if you ask me personally. But politically, I don't know if this is feasible. So at the end of the day, as a civil servant, you always have to compromise. We know that we have ideal world solutions. We have many ideal world solutions. But at the end of the day, you need you need to get laws through parliament, and parties don't want to lose their electorate. So we're looking at all the options. If you ask me if it's very realistic to get on a short run everywhere in Austria local price signals, let's see.
So I'm aware that the only thing standing between you and your lunch are these answers. I'm still going to proceed a little bit further, only a few minutes, and I'm putting all the pressure on the panel. Tara, Estl. So what is your stance on this quartet, on this market design that Karsten Neuhoff proposed?
Trying to be fast. And I'm trying to give one simple answer to the question zonal versus nodal pricing. And this is for sure anyway, we will need grid investments. And we will need grid investments in the distribution grid and in the transmission grid. Because the less congestions we have, the less the market design in the end is important, because the problems then arise less. And we will need the grid investments anyway. So this is the easy answer before I come to the market design question. I fully agree with the complexity of nodal pricing. I mean, it's difficult, it makes it more complex. When you want to install a storage, you need to look at very much different areas. You have to consider a lot of different things more than just look at a day-ahead market price. So it makes it more complex. It's less easy to sell to people. I mean, you just said it. And so I think there are pros and cons to a zonal market design and to a nodal market design. But what I'm sure is that we will need, even when we stay within zonal market design, we will need more geographic locational elements in it. And this is where we at the moment are working on, that we, for example, bring in the information of a local asset, that we know the flexibility, and then we can still use the flexibility and use the local information to help the grid. So it's like somewhere in between of zonal and nodal. It stays zonal, but it goes more in the direction of nodal.
Karsten Neuhoff, do you want to give a very, very brief reply?
Okay. On this question of the pool, we've discussed extensively whether it should only comprise wind or solar, or also flexibility assets. The reason why in the German discussion I think having only wind and solar helps is because for wind and solar we know how much we want to deploy. We can run a tender that gives the geographical incentives, and then you can ask TSOs that currently operate it to actually implement the operation, because there's no discretionary choice, and so others don't have to be worried. If we were to integrate all the flexibility elements, then effectively we move away something that otherwise traders do. And I think the one area where I do believe the national and European electricity market has a lot of value is this flexibility. So we started the European power system helping each other out on emergency situations. The market now helps us to kind of integrate more efficiently, and the more renewables we have on the system, the bigger the European benefit is of having this integrated system. We always forget to mention this part, so I wanted to say. And I think to operate this in a regulatory manner by national entities that are regulated is difficult. So that's why I feel we can think of having the flexibility outside run by others that are perhaps often better in engaging with the demand side. But my sense also is these pools can be implemented at a national level. They can cooperate in certain ways, and then we can learn what works best. So I think often we've had that experience, so here is a similar situation. On the shift to local pricing, I think it really is a paradigm shift in the way that a few years back, a lot of even economists argued, we can do with redispatch. And now we acknowledge that redispatch is not possible towards the demand side. And I think this change needs to go through the system to be acknowledged everywhere, to then say, okay, there is a need for change, and now let's think what is the best option for change. If there's something that really is required, I think then we'll succeed in implementing this as well. And obviously lots of discussions on these topics to come still.
Thank you very much for the discussion. As I said before, now is lunchtime. Lunch will be served in the next building where you already had your coffee break. Please grab your lunch and come back here. In 15 minutes, the General Assembly will start here. And please bring your food and eat while you're in the assembly. The most important thing is that you get fed. Thank you very much for your attention and the questions, and have a nice afternoon.